Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 112. We will be talking about The Craft, the Andrew Fleming movie from 1996. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. And do you have anything to plug?
Kind of, actually.
Good.
It's not me for me, but the Overlook Theater folks, they do the Unnamed Footage Festival and all that stuff. I find myself listening to their horror podcast more than anyone else's because I just would like to hang out with them more, and I just don't ever make it out here. But their comrade Terrell does Blu-ray Thursdays, and it is really fun. It's on YouTube, and I think of all of us Bay Area podcasting horror people, Terrell has the biggest chance of making it in this space.
Wow.
There's just something really charismatic about him, and he was on stage with Peaches Christ recently for some vampire. I can't remember the vampire movie, but just kudos and good job to those guys for doing all the horror stuff and doing a good job.
And I'm sorry, Blu-ray what? What is it?
Blu-ray Thursdays. But if you go to the Overlook Theater or Overlook, I can never remember. I'm so high. The Overlook Hour YouTube page, you'll see it. They just do like good reviews of horror movies, and it's just fun.
Cool.
Yeah. And this episode, which we initially set out to be very snarky and mean about The Craft, I for one was wrong, and as usual, and kind of enjoyed it. So this conversation is sort of like in praise of the film, but against witch talk, I guess.
We're going to talk about, obviously, The Craft and witchcraft and the soundtrack, and you're going to keep talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
I can't help it, man. I just this morning went to a seminar with Eddie Bravo, so it's on my mind.
Royalty.
Yep.
And talk about therapy and power and Harry Potter.
Did we talk about Harry Potter?
I did.
You did. Well, you are a turf.
We're off to a bad start.
As always.
So, spoilers ahead.
Yep. If you haven't seen this yet, you are clearly not a mall goth in the 90s.
Okay, Chad, what do we have to say about The Craft?
Well, I was surprised to find how much I really enjoyed seeing this movie again. I thought it was going to be like The Crow, where it was like a movie that was important to me at the time, but is a piece of shit. This is a great movie.
Yeah, so it was important to you when it came out?
Yeah. I was the girl's age when the movie came out, and the girls I was attracted to at the time were really into this movie and aped the look quite a bit, or just had it before or whatever.
So would you say that your libido was in some way formulated by Fairuza Balk?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like pretty much like, a little bit of Winona Ryder and Beetlejuice, a little bit of this, a little bit of like, probably some punk girl I saw in a record store or something when I was like 14 or 15, you know? Yeah. And I think part of it too was I associated that like girls that looked like that were also into the same kind of stuff I was, which was like at the time exceedingly rare. There wasn't like witch talk and like young cool girls who are like, I have all the Smiths albums and, like I got them off the spot. Like there just wasn't that. Like it was pretty rare to run into somebody that would be of the same interest.
Yeah. So I know that this is tangential from the film itself, but was there an occult bookstore that you frequented, or were you that?
100%. Yeah, for sure. Like there was, it's New Orleans, you know what I mean?
Oh, and of course. Yeah. I'm sorry. Stupid ass question, right?
So there was all of it. And there really three that I would say were really notable. And one came a little bit later after the fact. So I might have the dates mixed. And that store is still there. It's called Esoterica, and it's in the French Quarter. And the women that owned it, like in the 90s, were just like shockingly pretty and just really looked the part, and you just totally like bought the whole store, And then there was like out in the burbs where I lived, there was a, kind of a more of a generic new age store, and it was next to a coffee shop, and it was next to the mall. So it was where all of this kind of person like in the movie would hang out, So it was like, I certainly like learned about iced coffee and the Rider-Waite tarot deck in the same strip mall. Yeah. And but the third one that was the most interesting was there was a necromantic art gallery called the Westgate that was on Magazine Street that was absolutely incredible. The whole outside of the house was like black and purple, and you go inside and it had this huge Grim Reaper statue with giant black wings and shit. And then the woman who ran it, she was all in. Her whole shtick was that she was like the handmaiden to the angel of death. Like that was her her spiritual lover or something like that. And she was kind of a kook. And then her partner, her earthly partner, was like a hardcore Aleister Crowley dude. And I learned pretty much everything about that from him. And because I would go to parties at their places, I was pretty friendly with them. So we would go there and hang out there quite a bit.
Cool.
But yeah, so yeah, I was all in on this lifestyle at the time.
Yeah. It of course reminded me of the bookstore that Giles ran in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But there was a moment right at first when they walk into that bookstore where I was like, this is a bit of a caricature. And I was like, no, I've literally been in this bookstore many times in my life. It's real.
It's very much the LA version of that store, which is fair because it takes place in LA.
Yeah.
But like in that, like when I watched it the other day, I could smell that scene.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But about the movie, what do you remember from your impression of it from back then? Do you feel like holds today?
Yeah, well, okay, so back then I was like pretty ignorant to what made a good film, and this was just a movie that any girl I was making out with probably had on VHS, and we would throw it in. It was like this, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a bunch of movies like that, right? Like that people would have. And then I also like the actual occult aspects in this film are like fairly, I don't want to say realistic, but they're like semi-credible. So that
where teenage girls can fly, is that what you mean?
No, I mean like just like the way they're
and walk on water.
Almost the way their like theology works a little bit. Like they would go cobble it together from these various books that they could afford or steal or whatever. And you would be like, I'm a witch, but I have the Aleister Crowley deck. It's like all these mismatch of like esoteric systems that you sort of like that patchwork occult like knowledge felt very real to me in this. But having now done a movie podcast for years, I've read a lot more about films. I didn't, and I have like 20 plus years of learning about film. I think just the pacing of the movie is really good. Especially if you consider it an artifact of its time. The acting is mostly great.
Yeah.
The secondary character actors, I think, a lot of hamminess, but still pretty good. I think it has a real Mulholland Drive-y style LA look to the whole thing that I really quite like. And I think it gets the feeling of being like a teenager finding yourself in a way. Like there's the scene when they leave school and they're walking around the downtown. It really, to me, like evokes the actual feeling of being that age, going downtown for the first time, and how it feels like almost like a carnival. You don't know what's going around, and like maybe every person's interesting to you. And so that I thought that stuff was neat. And then all the characters get like interesting little arcs. Like nobody feels very left behind in the film. And then it doesn't resolve in a very obvious way. Like I think if this movie was made now, like the main character would probably like, jump kick the other three girls in the face and they would get their comeuppance in a way, but it doesn't end like that. Like one person has like a really bad downfall sort of, but like in proportion to what she did. And like, so it doesn't feel unbalanced. Like it feels like a very balanced movie to me. What about you? Yeah. You were a little older when this came out.
I was older, so I kind of missed it. I might have seen it when it came out, but I don't really remember. And I was certainly invested in goth stuff, but I wasn't a teenager when it came out, so it didn't resonate as much for me. And it's certainly better than I remember it. Yeah, and I think that maybe one of the things that kept it from being important to me when it came out is that the soundtrack is really fucking terrible. And maybe if I was younger, I would have overlooked that. But like, Tomorrow Never Knows is one of my favorite songs. That is a terrible cover of that song.
It's maybe one of the worst covers of it.
Yeah.
It's like, in particular, the guitar in it is very bad.
Well, it's also one of the most like bizarrely exotic, haunting psychedelic songs in rock history, and the cover is just like, it's just this rock song, a little edgy, whatever. The cover of How Soon Is Now by the Smiths is really fucking weak.
Yeah,
there's a Cars cover that's
what I was thinking when you were saying the previous one. Yeah,
they're both bad.
But yes, agree to both. Yeah,
I think there are like 4 cover songs in it, and they're all like. But
that
not great.
That was kind of a thing for this time. It would be like, like for example, the Crow soundtrack. A lot of covers on that.
Yeah. And I guess there's part of me that kind of appreciates that the soundtrack is not a bunch of goth songs. Because, you know, this is about a protagonist who doesn't wear black. She starts to wear black a little when she falls in with the crew, with her coven. But really, at the beginning and the end, she just kind of wears teenage girl clothes. And so if we think of the soundtrack as being a backdrop to her personality and narrative, it wouldn't be goth music, right? She's just a teenage girl in LA.
Yeah, I also don't love this soundtrack, but I think like the band that I think tells you exactly what the soundtrack is, Letters to Cleo.
Fully.
Right? Like this is like there were different like paths in the 90s that you could go down, especially for like alternative music. And this is certainly like the Gap grunge sort of thing, you know, like when you could go buy like a little, like pretty much when like Riot Grrrl got completely co-opted, that was that kind of look. And then there was music, like this is a, you know, this is a girl rock album, you know, or like a soundtrack album.
Yeah.
And I remembered it being a little bit more Riot Grrrl-ish, and that was not true. But but it is like what the Starbucks version of that was. So I think it's really like a period. I mean, obviously it's period correct because it was made during the period. But I think I think the choices of those songs made sense for those girls.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fashion too. I did sort of dig that the costuming really worked in that way as well.
I watched like a 30-minute documentary about like all or not doc, but like a video about the
like
outfits.
A breakdown.
Yeah, a breakdown of like how to get the looks from each of the different girls.
Did it answer the question, how did Fairuza Balk maintain her smoky eye makeup while she was institutionalized and bound?
I mean, she probably still has some magic powers left over, right? Like,
I guess that would be the thing to use them for.
Yeah.
Just to maintain your
just
look.
glamour your shit up while you're locked up. I think I might understand what you're reacting to is like, I am like probably surprisingly effusive about this movie. Like I like it way more than I thought I was going to, because I remember I pitched this like as me shitting on this movie. Was like kind of like,
yeah, that's right. I just received a text from you that was something to the effect of, hey, how do you feel about shitting all over the craft as our next episode or whatever? I was like, sure, great.
Yeah.
And then, I think we both were like, it's way better than I expected.
And I realized why I was having like kind of a bad feeling towards the craft.
Yeah.
Is because I have a kind of a bad feeling towards influencer witches.
Totally.
You know, and it's and I don't mean like people who are invested in witchcraft, but like for example, Stephen from the Buckland Museum. I'm wearing a Buckland Museum shirt right now.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, my sleeveless Buckland Museum shirt. What's up, bro? It's not people being invested in witchcraft that I think is corny. It's pretty much anything that's influence peddled on social media feels corny to me. And there's a particular, it just reminds me of like how televangelists would always be asking for money. You know, there's just the whole like, pay me $30 and I'll do a money spell for you. It just seems fucked up. It seems to prey on a specific type of woman. And I don't, you know, who I have a lot of friends that are like that. So I kind of think of it as like pagan NFTs almost, or something like that. There's just something unsavory about the online representation of witchcraft. But at the same time, there's also like hot witches online. That's kind of cool, you know? So I feel kind of mixed about it.
Yeah, I'm cynical about it in a slightly different way, or
like everyone's a witch. Way. Is everybody a witch? Like, what does it take to be a witch? You know?
That's partly it, is that being married to a feminist drag queen performance artist, Monique is often revered as a witch, you know, and she definitely has far more woo in her than I. And 50% of the esoterica in this room is hers. But like, yeah, what does witch even mean anymore? I think witch is sort of, at this point, it's sort of like the word trauma. If everything's trauma, nothing is trauma. If every strong, interesting woman is a witch, nobody's a witch. It ceases to sort of have a concrete, locatable meaning. And I think that's a shame, because I think there's something really interesting about this post-New Age pagan pseudo-spiritual path, although I'm incredibly cynical about it at the same time. There's a lot about it that I really appreciate.
Well, I had joked about like how you could just basically like do a Christopher Hitchens style book, but just aim it at witchcraft and call it like Goddess Isn't Great. Like
Fully.
I disbelieve in it in the same way I disbelieve in pretty much everybody's shit, you know? So but to me though, like what's interesting about witchcraft is, and like I have so many witch books and like, you know, like I'm more invested than you may know from conversation with me in it. And it's an aesthetic investment. You know, I think it is an interesting thing. And even like, you know, I think some people may disagree with this, but I think Raymond Buckland just made up all that shit and boom, we have witchcraft. You know, I think it's pretty like, I'm not going to go do all the heavy lifting and research or whatever, but I think it's pretty clear that like he was not part of an ancient coven and was not initiated into it. And he cobbled it together the way that like J.R.R. Tolkien cobbled Elvenism together. You know what I mean? But what's kind of fun about it though, is instead of like keeping it in like a narrative fiction space in a book, it like escapes into the real world. And it's and that to me is very, very interesting and fun.
I'm so glad you said that. I think about it more in line with something like Harry Potter, where it is these stories in which the protagonists have powers. You know, you were talking about the credibility of some of the occult practices of the characters in this movie. And we've talked about that before. And we talked about it with Stephen from the Buckland Museum. You know, what do you think is a credible representation of the occult? And what's funny is that most representations of the occult in cinema are ones in which essentially you buy a bunch of books and then suddenly you're able to transform space and time.
Right.
Which is what Harry Potter is. Like, he's just this kid who can like transform space and time. He has powers. And I find this a fascinating bleed over.
I want to put a pin in the idea of hereditary powers for later in the conversation.
Great.
But yeah.
Totally. And that's something I'm just generally cynical about is that so much of my fatigue around occult is the very true thing that the best spell you can cast to open a door is to get up off your ass, cross the room, and turn the handle. Right? Like if you want something done, go do the work that it takes to do that thing. And so all the books, all the magic, all the studying to like have someone love you, have a better job, have some sort of power, whatever sort of, well, it's all power, you know, whatever sort of power you want in the universe. I feel like investing it in these esoteric practices instead of learning how to actually do the fucking thing is actually taking the long way round to affecting change in your world.
I mean, you're not even taking away. You're just kind of like standing there goofing off.
Pretty much. And it's fun and it's rad and it can build community, and you know, occult practices are super fascinating and weird, and it does overlap with certain things like meditation and things like that have genuine inherent, I don't want to say benefits, like you're maximizing benefits, but like actually do something. But I actually, just as an aside, I think it's so funny. One thing, I'm not calling this movie out on being like inconsistent or something like that. But another thing that's funny about teenagers practicing the occult in almost any representation in TV and cinema is that it's these kids who are just sort of like blah, and they somehow have these powers that, like when they're doing the light as a feather, stiff as a board, they're totally fucking off. They're totally distracted. They're giving it only half of their attention, but they're like, okay, you guys concentrate. They're not concentrating on shit.
I disagree. I totally disagree.
They're not manifesting shit.
I totally disagree.
Like if occult powers exist and they take like study and concentration, it would take more than like reading 3 books that you stole from the occult bookstore to like levitate.
For sure, yeah. Like one of the things I love is the scene when they're like arguing with the lady at the bookstore, and they're like, I'll take this book, please. And they're like, it is full of powerful things that you can't control. She's like, well, I have $25. Go fuck yourself.
Which is pretty good.
I love that. It's just so funny. It's like, well, how dangerous is this book? You know, what are we talking about here? You know? But, you know, like when I think about my own personal path and of interest into the occult, it actually comes from like psionics. So I had, when I was very, very young, I had like one of those like time life psychic powers, you know? And so to me, the idea that like there was like human potential that could be achieved, like sort of like in Dune, you know, I had read Dune when I was really young too. So the idea of like being trained in an esoteric practice to develop your human willpower and your performance even was something that was very interesting to me. And, you know, you run into like witchcraft and stuff like that, and you're like, well, here is the methodology for it. But the thing about it is, it's just like, it's almost like saying like, oh, I want to be a chemist, but I'll study alchemy. It's weird and retromaniac and it's in its own way. But, you know, when you discover it at a certain time, it's really fun. And there's also like real consequences, or there were, to being in it. Like I went to a Catholic school and was into fucking witchcraft. It was not an easy road to go down. It was pretty shitty at the time.
It's hard for me not to think of that sort of thing as being tied to an age. I am not saying that. I don't want to take anything away from adults who look into the occult.
We should.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can. But I feel like discovering Aleister Crowley, for example, is like discovering Ayn Rand. It often happens when you're at a certain age and you're trying to find your place in the world and finding what power you can have in that world at a time when you are starting to reckon with how powerless you are in the world.
Yeah.
You're starting to gain independence. And so you are learning how to seize your own power when you're navigating the world outside of the domain of your family. But you're also discovering, you're coming up against the limitations of what it is to be on your own and an independent person.
Yeah.
And I think those go hand in hand. And it's just, although, you know, it's funny. It's like these same books that you would discover when you're a teenager or whatever age. And like, oh, I can have these powers by reading these books. Hollywood takes those exact same books and strategies, but actually like it does the thing that it says it does instead of in reality where it doesn't do shit. But it's not unlike, to be fair, it's not unlike a John Wick movie. Like,
totally.
if you study mixed martial arts and firearms, you can be a fucking super predator. It's like, that's actually not true. But if you watch John Wick, that's 100% what happens.
Right,
it's
right.
like to a surreal, fantastic level that's not unlike what Fairuza Balk is capable of in the craft, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's like an interesting parallel too, because it's like the moves that John Wick is doing in the film are fairly realistic. Like you will see judo, jujitsu, like there's things on screen that you see. Are anybody doing that like while shooting other people? No, like that's, I mean, I don't think so, you know? And I think that's how like the occult is presented in this. It's like people do candle magic and sympathetic readings and stuff like that. And I actually really love in general people building altars and things like that, because it's basically like a little museum to yourself, you know?
Yeah.
And, but I love the opening scene where there's like the bag of weed on the altar. Like I had never noticed until now.
I didn't notice
that.
Yeah,
in the opening credits when they're like, you know, doing it's a really great job of setting the mood, you know, because it's like there's a ritual space. And if you were a teenage mall goth that trafficked in the occult, you're familiar with that whole thing and what's on it. But like as part of the offering, like a dime bag, awesome. Like, and the rest of there's no real reference to anybody doing drugs in the rest of the thing. They smoke, but you know,
right. And
drinking.
The main character, she goes drinking. That's another thing I kind of appreciated about it is like teenage girl goes drinking twice. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
She doesn't pay the price for it. There's no moralizing around it. It's just like, teenagers go drink. It's what happens.
Yeah. The only moralizing in the film really is like, there's a little bit of monkey's paw happening, you know, where it's like,
hubris.
I think like the monkey's paw is like a psyop to keep humanity broadly from dreaming big. You know, it's like, don't dream too big, otherwise you'll get destroyed by your. I think it's fucked up. Like you should just pedal to the floor and go for it, whatever it is, you know? And which is why I appreciate Fairuza Balk's character probably the most, because she has arguably the worst home situation.
Oh yeah.
I would say. And I just appreciate her hedonism with her powers. I think it's kind of, you know, she's just running red lights, doing hood rat shit with her friends, you know, like that's rad. I don't know. There's just some fun stuff, like especially how the dynamic of the group changes. Like eventually, like the two girls who are like suddenly pretty become sort of morons, and they're like the second, you know, they're the third and fourth characters now. It's interesting as like the things they wanted affect things. And it's almost like the main girl, when she becomes obsessed with like kind of bossing the dude around, that's when Fairuza Balk's character has like an opportunity to kind of take over the group because she's a little bit more obsessed with power. And then Robin Tenney's character goes off for this like sort of silly "I'll get back at you" romance thing, whereas Fairuza Balk basically wishes for a million wishes, and I think that's the right move, right?
I guess so.
Like if power is real, like in the context of
fully.
Yeah.
Before we were rolling, we were talking about the degree to which this movie passes the Bechdel test. Like it slays the Bechdel test.
Except for in the fact that like a lot of the conversations is about a boy.
Well, but that's what I was going to say is
But it's
actually the
realistic,
protagonist.
though.
Oh, it's really realistic. But the protagonist, she has these inherent powers, and she has inherent power beyond what the other three have.
Mm-hmm.
But the best thing she can think of to do with it is to get this asshole guy who fucked her over and lied about her to like her because she still likes him, which is very sad.
Yeah. But she's also a sad character. Like her character's actually sad.
Yeah.
When you look on IMDb, one of the things about this movie that's kind of funny is it has like a lot of continuity errors. Like, one person wearing a shirt when they walk in the scene, it's a different shirt, and which to me seems like a very like mid-90s film thing. I guess they just didn't have people in charge of that back then. But even now, Starbucks cups in Game of Thrones, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I thought the score is pretty decent.
It was Graham Revell, who I think is from SPK, who was part of the whole Throbbing Gristle scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense then that it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of like credibility in the DNA of this film. Like they had like, instead of just being like, let's get some witches over here, make them sexy. Like they had like witchcraft consultants. Like they were like high priestesses of whatever that sort of said what the rituals should look like and things like that, which makes me like one of the things that I think is one of the most interesting choices is they make up this male deity that they worship that doesn't exist in the real world. Mammon. But even Pazuzu exists.
No kidding,
That's like you can go find Paimon. Yeah, like those are like from certain mythologies. This is just totally made up.
Yeah,
I thought that was an interesting choice to make it a male deity when everything else was so, I don't want to say correct, but
right.
Something else we were talking about before we got on here is like how surprisingly little a lot of the actresses or actors in the film went on to do, like with their career afterwards.
Completely.
Yeah, like I mean, Nev Campbell, obviously exception.
Very much.
And Skeet Ulrich going on. I mean, Scream is basically what propels them.
Yeah,
that comes out like a few months after this.
Yeah, well, Neve Campbell was it Party of Five or 20-something or one of those fucking shows. Fairuza Balk didn't do a lot, but boy, did she maintain a lot of notoriety. And honestly, I had not seen this movie in so long that the protagonist, I totally forgot about her. I forgot she was even a character. I kind of was like, well, wait, was Fairuza Balk the protagonist or was it Neve Campbell? Or I don't even remember what this movie's about. Like, the main character is someone I don't remember.
That's the problem of having like a really like charismatic villain.
Yeah.
Is sometimes like the protagonist gets completely forgotten.
It's kind of got a bit of the Disney film thing that way.
Yeah. And Fairuza Balk, she definitely goes for it in some scenes, like maybe a little too far.
A little too much, maybe.
A little too much. But I mean, God, I knew so many girls that were like basically cosplaying her in like the late 90s and the same bipolar energy.
She has a lot to answer for.
Yeah, she really does. You know what she is? She is the female version of Tyler Durden.
Huh.
Like just dudes thought they were Tyler Durden after they saw Fight Club.
Right.
Like, I mean, I always kind of like thought like the Edward Norton character was cooler because I like the idea of like a sleeper deviant. I think is a little bit more interesting to me.
For sure.
Like the dirty button down short sleeve shirt with a tie to me is like a lot. There's just something about that versus like a cool guy,
Yeah.
Then there's like, Rachel True. We talked about her, but there's it seems
she
like
didn't go on to do pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And she's also great in this movie.
She also didn't go on to get invited to be like on like the panels and stuff afterwards.
Can you talk more about that? That's fucking terrible as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, like you can go look this up on the internet. There's like a lot of this writing is actually fairly recent to it. You know, there's like the social justice reckoning in the world, but like there were like events where 3 of the 4 girls are booked, but not her. You know, and there's some accusations of racism out there. Like I don't know what the people who booked her intended, so I wouldn't like necessarily support those claims, but this is the world we live in, so I don't necessarily not support them, you know? But it's kind of a shame because she's like the most legit occultist of them all, you know? I listened to an interview with her on Witch Wave, which is a, you know, kind of a 90s mall goth witch podcast. And she had been very into tarot cards like her whole life, and then was really studying about witchcraft and stuff when the script landed on her. And from her perspective is like the script found her, which is like a very magical outlook. But yeah, you know, she is recently sort of, as tarot cards and astrology have ascended in mass popularity, and that story kind of got out. She's kind of having a little bit of like an occult celebrity, I guess.
Good.
Yeah, good for her. Yeah.
Didn't Fairuza Balk like buy an occult bookstore?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had always remembered her identifying as a witch, but apparently that's not the case. She just, as part of her research for this film, like was going into this bookstore all the time and ended up buying it. And then like 6 years later gave it to the people, or sold it to the people who were managing it for her. So she had a cool occult bookstore for a minute.
When thinking about being a witch and the authenticity of being a witch and who gets to call themselves one, I feel like there is an overlap with thinking about metal and Satanism, like who's a real Satanist and things like that.
I was thinking about the same thing.
And maybe at the periphery of some Christian art forms, you don't necessarily get, like, you might question whether someone is a good Christian, but I don't really read Christianity as having authenticity debates as rife. I mean, you know, every philosophical system, every aesthetic movement, they all have infighting and calling out and all of that. But I find it interesting that in the occult, whether satanic or witchcraft or whatever, there are these really broad strokes of like people posing as that thing.
Yeah.
And deep questions about whether it's just a sort of veneer or not. I wouldn't say that's not in Christianity, but it definitely plays a very different part.
Yeah. Well, I think in Christianity, there's like, they're like kind of like experts, right? Like you could be a priest or a pastor or even like a PhD in religious studies, specializing in Christianity or something like that. And it's like, maybe there just isn't the same credentialing with witchcraft. And I also think, you know, even though like the Marine Corps recognizes Wicca as a religion, and you could, you know, to me, one of the things that was difficult, because like if I'm going to go join something and like thing, I want there to be kind of like, I don't want to say like rules, because I'm, you know, quite interested in breaking rules, but like, you know, if you go, like, for example, you say you're a Cubs fan, you should go watch some Cubs games, you know, and same thing with Christianity. Like one of the things about that is like you should be at the very least reading the Bible and probably going to a church, like as the minimum entry to say you're this thing. And then, you know, and like something like Catholicism, you don't get to just be like, I'm Catholic. Like there's like, it's an organization, you join it. And you know, like Wicca has quite a bit of different organizations that are, some are official, some are non-official, but none of them are really, like the broader culture doesn't recognize any of them as authoritative. Whereas like the broader culture might be like, well, you know, Jimmy Swaggart's televangelical church was so big that it is official. And if you're associated with that, you really are a Christian. Whereas there just isn't that with witchcraft for broader culture, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are, we're just ignorant to it. Like, I'm sure there is like a main national body of what we should have fucking Steven on this episode.
Damn it.
Really screwed up. Well, I mean, you could be like, I'm a Christian. Like you could, if you wanted to.
Well, you could, but I question, you know what? I don't want to posit too much about Christianity I guess rather than make a statement, I would pose a question. It seems to me that if you saw a witch influencer on Instagram, it would be so easy to just immediately go like, how long have you been at this, and how much is it tied to being an influencer? In the same way as just because you're in a metal band and you have pentagrams on your album cover doesn't mean any of you have a relationship to Satanism. Not really.
I mean,
it is questionable at the outset. It's just part of the veneer.
I think I definitely am picking up what you're putting down here. I think for me, it gets complicated by the idea of like where commerce and spirituality overlap a little bit. There's just like a potential for like charlatans and corruption, you know, and it's a little bit more pernicious than like, you know, some e-girl wearing a Fugazi shirt and doesn't know any Fugazi songs, you know, the classic, you know, meme sort of thing. Like, I don't really care about that. Like, if she cares enough about Fugazi to have a Fugazi shirt, that's good enough for me. But if somebody's like, I will charge you, sad person, $10 to remove a curse from you with this candle spell, you know, like and subscribe, it has a little bit more of like a fleecing, which I find to be just in general, you know, I hate it in mega churches. I hate it in like tarot readers in the French Quarter. You know what I mean? Like I'm not a fan of it at all, unless it gets into like the territory of like just entertainment. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I went and somebody read my tarot card in the French Quarter and it was like a ghosty thing to do. It was pretty fun. That's one thing. But like my wife, she went, one of her friends had a birthday party and they were like, oh, let's go to like one of these like neon front psychics, right? And they go there and the woman told my wife that somebody had cast a darkness on her and she could take it off of her for $500.
Fuck off.
Yeah, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like that, that is in there. And I think that's like, you see it in yoga, you know, like the fucking Bikram dude or any, there's so many times when a person, like, it's just very, in my opinion, dangerous for people. Because a lot of people who are interested in looking for something or searching for things, like it's like people can use that urge against them. It's almost like multi-level marketing, right? Like a lot of the people who get into MLMs are really trying to do the right thing. They're trying to get the side hustle going so they can make a little bit more money. It's like a theoretical step in the right direction, but this person has come along and stood in the way of their path to doing something real. And that to me is like what I don't like about like the sort of like esoteric influencer scene. But at the same time, you know, if you get like what's the difference between a little old lady but lighting a candle in a church and some sad cat aficionado doing the same thing in her bedroom on her altar? Not much.
Oh, not much. And, you know, it's funny, the deeper I'm going into this degree in learning about the efficacy of placebos.
It's real, man.
It's very, very real. And actually, speaking to that, I'm going to get a degree to become a psychotherapist. And, you know, it's a credentialed thing. You need a degree. And it's not hard to get, but it's not easy to get. But the world is also full of like life coaches. Yeah. Which I think is fine. If, you know, God knows there are therapists out there doing a lot of damage. And just because they have degrees doesn't mean that they're not harmful to their clients. And life coaches, it's not that I think that the government needs to intercede in everybody's lives and make sure there are credentials for every occupation. But, you know, life coach and therapist are pretty close in many ways. And I sort of feel like tarot reader, astrologer, psychic can fill a position that is not unlike a life coach in that to be good at those things, if you're committed to your job, you learn a system of some sort. You learn a way of dealing with people. And a good tarot reader should know the system, but should also be intuitive and be able to talk to and understand people. Yeah. Or a psychic should not be Whoopi Goldberg from Ghost, but someone who can do cold reading like a fucking, like a magician. And yes, that's a sham thing, but also go like, okay, what does this person need from me right now? Right. They're coming to me with a problem. If I'm good at my job, I'm going to tease that problem out and I'm going to potentially, like, let's say, am I good at my job? And my impression is this person needs comfort. This person is in distress. I will give them comfort and to help abate their distress.
Yeah. Sometimes like a hug is enough.
Right.
You know, like.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people who are in these sort of like occult practices for profit, I don't especially believe in any of the foundation of them. But at the same time, you know, like confession's good for the soul. I don't believe in Catholicism, but I do believe that like there's a place for not saying Hail Marys and guilt, but having a sacred space to communicate and talk with someone who will give you understanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think of this business idea. If I get laid off, I had this idea for a business where it's like I would just clean your house with you and just listen to you.
That's really good.
Well, it was kind of interesting. It comes from a conversation that my wife had with one of her friends a long time ago. It was an argument actually where, you know, my wife was saying like, oh, I'm going to therapy or whatever she was doing. And she said, and her friend was like, well, how much does it cost? And she said whatever it was. Let's just say $200. I don't know what it was, but she's like, oh, it's $200 a month. And her friend was like, well, I'd rather have a house cleaner for that amount, which sort of like gets you into the territory of your like Jordan Peterson, who like, regardless of what you think about him, I'm not a huge fan at all. I do think his advice to clean your room is excellent advice.
Yep.
I think like, I wish he was not controversial in any other way so that one single piece of message could get out and be like, yeah, sometimes just making your bed and cleaning up your room is like the first step to a mental health journey to success. And so my idea was just like, I would just listen, you know, it's like, man, that's crazy. And then I'm old enough and sensible enough to probably have good advice.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I was like, ah, you know, you could do, and then I was like, man, if you did cash only, you could probably make like a pretty good amount of money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah. I also like cleaning.
I think you should quit your job and do that.
You know, it's funny. Every single person I tell this idea to is like, this is a great idea. You know, I just give, you know, sort of like dude from 1985 advice, you know, this stuff that kind of works for people, like your Dave Ramsey-ish kind of shit.
Guy from 1985. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Like just a regular dude, you know, from just full on non-encumbered by media practical advice. Like, you know, like this guy's a tattoo artist and he, you know, has two kids with two different women. Should I date him? No, absolutely not. You know, like just that sort of thing. You know, or like, you know, I remember one of my friends was like, she was like dating and like one of my wife's friends actually, you know, so kind of like post 40 and dating. And, you know, she just kept finding like she wasn't finding guys that like dressed the way she liked or whatever. I was like, that's valid. I was like, but go get yourself like a good dude, like a fireman, and then dress him. Like, you know, like that sort of advice is just old man advice. I think would work for some people. Like, but with an understanding, you know, you can't just be like, don't be a slut. Like that shit would usually come along with it, but you just don't do that.
Yeah.
But also I'm awesome at cleaning. So that would be good.
It's great. It's sort of slightly Marie Kondo.
Yeah, it's kind of like I was describing it. If I was going to do it, it would be like Marie Kondo meets Chuck Palahniuk meets Larry the Cable Guy. Would be kind of like my vibe.
Where does Larry the Cable Guy come in?
Just how I dress.
Oh,
you know, you got this showing up at your house.
Yeah,
like, you know, I'm not wearing like a little prim suit like Marie Kondo.
Yes.
Unlicensed therapist.
Yeah.
/ house cleaner.
Yeah.
Yeah. AI is not taking that job away.
No, although it really does make me think of, when's the last time you saw THX 1138?
Oh, it's been like 20 years.
Okay. Do you remember that there are these sort of confessional booths and they just have this automated video? It's sort of confession, it's sort of therapy, but it's just this automated response thing. It's not even AI because I don't think it even reacts.
I'm getting it a little mixed up with like Logan's Run and Brave New World, where you like order up your date and they walk through the television into your place.
I don't even remember that.
Yeah. It was sort of like in Brave New World, there's a very OnlyFans-ish technology, but you like get to like hook up with the person like on the spot.
So much better than OnlyFans.
Yeah, I guess it's more like prostitution, I guess. But it's like, but they're not professionals. You know what I mean? It's just it's more like Tinder, I guess, enabled by some sort of like advanced teleportation TV thing.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's better than jetpacks.
Oh, for sure. Like, if I was single, I would rather have, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'd rather have a jetpack.
So speaking of flying, the craft.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I wanted to get back to think about the powers, like how the powers are represented, because you were like, oh, they're fucking not even paying attention while they're levitating.
Yes.
So I think, now because I'm back into doing jujitsu, everything has to relate back to jujitsu because I have that particular sickness at the moment.
Yep.
Yeah, so apologies in advance. But
at least it's not NFTs.
Exactly. But to me, like one of the things that's interesting about what they're doing is they're sort of like a pack or like a team even. And like they're getting better through play. Like, so their powers actually emerge through like playfulness with each other almost as much as they do the rituals themselves. I mean, obviously like the ritual, their most formal seeming ritual is the one where they take the bus out and the "We Are the Weirdos, Mr." scene. Like they have like this kind of formal, like, if you fall upon this knife, you're a bitch or whatever. I can't remember exactly what it is.
Not quite the script.
That's exactly what it is. That's what like really seems to ignite their powers with the presence of this one person who's like a natural witch. But like, I don't love the idea of natural powers, like inherited powers. It just like makes me think of the fucking monarchy and I hate it. It's like the thing I hate about Star Wars the most is that like, there's just that.
The midichlorians.
Oh, Jesus Christ. What a terrible idea that was. Yeah, I hate it. One of the reasons why I think Rogue One is a more interesting Star Wars movie than anything else that's come out along it is because you have people who are sort of able to manifest force powers without theology. Like they're like the blind dude can kind of like do force stuff. In this movie, it's kind of similar. Like some of them have like natural power, some of them learn it, and then some of them are just seem to be along for the ride. Like I can't imagine like Nev Campbell or Rachel True's characters having come up with any power on their own.
That's fair. I like your sort of anti-monarchist take on powers.
Oh man, I hate the fucking monarchy more than anything. Like every time I see any royal person in a news feed, it makes me angry.
Sure.
Yeah.
But in a sense, I hate to talk about the hero's journey or Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, no relation. So much of our cinema and literary history is based on innate, inherited, whether directly inherited or innate power.
Yeah.
Do you find there's a difference between inherited versus innate?
Well, yeah, I mean, probably, because being involved back to jiu-jitsu, there are some people who are just fucking phenoms. Yeah. And, they're like, hi, it's my fourth class. And they just fucking smash you because whatever, they're just super athletes. And like, that's a thing. And so I think that in a universe like this, there would be some people who are better at magic than other people. But I don't like it when it's like, I don't want to keep using Star Wars as an example, but like Rey, who has powers and they're not developed through any, like no matter how innately powerful you are, you still do need a little bit of development. Like for example, Paul Muad'Dib in Dune, it's not just that he's the Kwisatz Haderach or how you pronounce it. It's that he's been trained by an order of witches his whole life. Right. And not just that, he's been trained to be like the head of a military his entire life.
Yeah, so it's not like you have your quinceañera and suddenly your powers manifest.
Yeah, I guess that's like in fiction. That's the thing that bothers me is it like, you're like, oh, I got powers now, bitch. Like that shit is stupid. Like I actually even like it in this movie because no one really has powers until they start sort of like doing the practices together, figuring it out together. In some ways, it's like they're like a rock band, and
yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
never thought of it that way, but absolutely. Oh, thank God they didn't start a band.
Oh, thank God. Yeah, that. But there's also a little bit of like how like the X-Men rocket. Like your powers might manifest, but unless you get to go to the Xavier Institute, you might like accidentally murder your whole family, or with your porcupine quills that shoot out of your dick or whatever your terrible mutation is.
Yeah. No, I totally thought about X-Men as well. The like, oh yeah, you can just go down to your New Age bookstore, pick up a few books, and then you have X-Men powers.
Yeah. But then, like silly. You mentioned earlier, we were talking about the placebo effect, and I really like kind of like thinking about the stuff like around like psycho-cybernetics and things like that, where it's like your self-image just that you can craft on your own really has like, for example, you go get yourself some nice clothes, a haircut, and get in a little bit of shape. You're probably going to be effective in a lot of different ways than you were before, and outside of the health of your fitness or whatever. That improvement, nothing really changed other than the way you feel about yourself, but all of a sudden you're finding yourself more effective in the world. I mean, that was literally the process I went through. Was like I was essentially like hating life as a bartender, and I was like, well, how do I get a job in an office that like lets me have a career? I mean, I went and read fucking How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to try doing this shit, and it kind of worked.
Yeah,
so there's like practices you can do, and they all kind of, you have to sort of. The first step is like acknowledging that you are the person capable of doing that. Like all the guys that memorize decks of cards, you shuffle a deck of cards and they can memorize it all the way through.
Yeah.
So that's learnable by almost anybody. And the methodology is called the memory castle. And I could do it up to like 30 cards at one point, which was like crazy.
What?
I know, right?
Holy shit.
Yeah. And because I bought the classic book, The Memory Castle, because I was like, oh, there was a guy who basically wrote a book about memory. It was like a New York Times bestseller, airport grade book. And I listened to him on the podcast, and he's like, I'm kind of a dumbass. I can memorize a full deck of cards. And he did it. I was like, that's kind of a neat trick. And the other thing you can do is walk into a room and memorize everybody's names right away, and you look like a superhero. And
yeah.
I did it with like 25 people. It was the most people I've been able to do it. But the first step is you do not speak ill of your own memory abilities. Like you don't go, oh, I have a terrible memory, because you're incapable of using the memory castle correctly unless you knock that thought out of your head. And to me, that is borderline magic.
Okay, so this is going to be hopefully not too much of a long, windy road. Yep. But one thing I appreciate and kind of find tiresome about Wicca and witchcraft is that so much of it resides in this idea that we touched on earlier, that like, oh, these were passed down from our foremothers and things like that. You don't know that. Like, I mean, this is very simplistic, and people who know much more about this than I have absolute right to criticize the simplistic thing I'm about to say. But it's like most of what we know about the history of witchcraft comes from the Malleus Maleficarum, right? It's these negative takedowns from the church, that we are confronted with a social spiritual movement that doesn't have a lot of artifacts that give us concrete information about its history, and that history is cobbled together. But so many of the fakers are able to talk about it as if it's this like unbroken lineage. And I think that's very unfortunate, but it's also super, and I'm being very unkind about it, and I'm leaving a lot of things out, but I think that's also really fascinating. So like, I mean, that's what the whole New Age movement is based on, right? Like, I'm just going to cobble together a bunch of shit, and if it feels good, that's for me. Yep. And even if most of it is misinterpretations and misappropriations of other systems, what I appreciate about that is that it is taking something that has been suppressed and undermined and abused by men of history, let's say, if we want to just talk about it in a matrilineal spirituality, and making something of it, finding community and power in a space that has been suppressed and used as a fiction to murder women in history, right?
Yep.
And I think that is so much more powerful than so much, let's say, so much of the way that social justice narratives function, which, today, I think I sent you this article about Ilana Glazer's ad for, I think it was Miller Lite, where it sort of feels like a condescending lecture about women's history and brewing practices than it does about like, hey, you know what's fun? Women and beer, drink, I don't want to belabor this too much, but one thing I find really unfortunate about a current place in feminism is that so many academic women who focus on feminism, on women's history and stuff like that, it's focusing, if you took a women's studies 101 class, I took women's studies, the entire class was about how oppressed women are. And nothing that was said in that class was wrong. But if I was a woman, I would be taking a class that was reminding me how shitty it is for women. That's the class. We are going to reify how awful it is for women. Nothing in that class was about empowerment, and nothing was in that class was empowering that I can remember. It was a great class, but so much academic writing in the feminist space is about really entrenching in history when things were worse for women, and as opposed to forward casting to where things are obviously improving for, at least in the Western world, for women. And I find that, in a sense, I'm saying something quite obvious. Like, yeah, one of the cool things about all this silliness, like witchcraft has been cool in popular culture for quite a while now. Well, one thing that's cool about it is it's just women seizing power.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool. And they should.
Yeah. I mean, I think about once again, back to jujitsu, like just thinking about something in a certain way, just doing mental rounds, like, visualizing yourself actually choking out your buddy. Like, I found that when I visualize results and that sort of thing, like concentrate, think about, like almost even daydream, like successful movement, it seems to show up on the mat. Like it seems to actually kind of work. And I would say, like, maybe you're like unlucky in love and you get a magic spell candle or whatever and you light it up and you think about it. It's like, maybe it's not doing anything, but you're thinking like, you know what? I do want to meet somebody. So I'm going to put on a little nicer outfit today. And you go outside because of, it's almost like the way that people who like take supplements and then change their diet better a little bit because they spent $60 on supplements. So they're not going to eat trash. It's as much as I think in a lot of my life, my inclination is to just be cynical and shit on stuff. I've also found that like when I do stuff like this, it's actually really effective. So I would probably never tell anybody, hey, don't do witchcraft because it's dumb. Like I wouldn't tell somebody that, but I would also never believe that your curse would do fuck all to me.
Right.
And I would also tell you never give anyone money unless like it was like something you could just budget and afford to lose, or you were buying something cool like an artist's tarot deck or something like that,
sure. Yeah. Witchcraft or any of these practices are about affecting power, about affecting your will. Like, yeah, it's not going to make you fly, and it's no substitution for going and doing the work. But if it focuses you in a positive way on doing the work, that's kind of inherently good.
Yeah. There's a Daniel Bolelli wrote that book, How to Create Your Own Religion. And, it's pretty smart. It's like, you just basically are trying to create an infrastructure to go through the world in a way that sometimes you need a little bit of a boost to get over some shit. And then sometimes you just need like a narrowing set of behavior to not be a dickhead. Sometimes that's like enough to do whatever. I mean, think about like Mormonism is just made up in the 1850s. Found some people. To me, that's what's
and
really
it's pretty fucking effective for a lot of people.
I mean, it keeps people in line, and I find Mormon kids seem to be quite delightful to be around. They're not too terrible, Mormon cities are very clean. They seem to actually have, another thing about Mormons is they haven't solved their homeless problems, but they've like their inbuilt practicality is like, what's the best way to keep people from being homeless? Put them in houses. And like, that's like the Salt Lake City method is they built housing, amazing. And so those are all like, to me, really positive results. Hard to argue. I'm sure there's some dark shit that goes on over there, like sister wives and whatnot. Like yeah, for sure. But I guess my whole reason for invoking Mormonism is like, I could see a world in which there was like a more unified practice of witchcraft that became a bigger, more viable religion for people. I could just see like the number one religion for NBs being some form of like denominational witchcraft or non-denominational witchcraft.
Yeah. But that shit always needs to be codified, and God knows that's not happening.
Yeah.
Again, if any listener feels like I'm talking about them, I apologize, and I'm not talking about
it's
you.
It's for sure you.
But I feel like the majority of people who go deep, deep, deep into this shit lose their way quickly.
there definitely is a kind of person that can just like go off the rails. Like we had a friend who hadn't seen her in a while, go out to dinner with her, like friend of a friend, you know, like somebody who would frequently be with someone we would meet out. And she's just like, it wasn't, I mean, God, what's normal, right? But she's just like a regular lady, you know? And then we meet her and she starts talking about like the spirits sitting around us at the table and like just really off the rails, like sort of like almost like Black Hebrew Israelite speech, but like for white ladies, like just really just this, you know, my guardian angel spirits. And you're like, whoa, this is like a hodgepodge of like beliefs. It's like, you got like, these are like conflicting things, you know, it's like, what's going on here? But she seemed so untethered from reality in a very like unhealthy way. Like it was, you know, but then.
And I think this shit can exacerbate that.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
That's a problem, especially because at least on the exaggerated end, and I am totally smearing satanic practices and occult practices with Wicca and witchcraft and all that. But there's overlap and shared territory, you know, in a sort of like post-Crowleyan estimation of this stuff. But like, part of asserting your will in the world.
Because you could go into a bookstore right now, an occult bookstore, and find Scottish witchcraft or like Hebrew witchcraft. Like there's like a bunch of different like brands of it that you could adopt. And, you know, there's that publishing company, Llewellyn Books. They would like crank out a new book every couple months about whatever.
Oh, for sure. But a large part of it is sort of creating the world in your own image as you see fit. And that is a very bold thing, and it can be a very empowering thing. But also, if you go too far down that road, that's a mental illness. And I think that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Obviously, being in school for this shit is, I mean, before I even started school, I've had this very firm belief that like, if your politics or your spiritual practice resembles a mental illness, you have a serious fucking problem that you're going to have a really hard time undoing, and you're probably doing yourself and others harm.
Yeah.
And that, I don't want to get into politics too much right now, but that's definitely, I feel like, informs a lot of what the shittiness of what we're seeing on all sides of the political spectrum at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's just graze politics. There's like not like too much space between everyone's a Nazi and I'm being followed by the government, you know, like as far as like, paranoia goes.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Well, and also just a dedication to a vehement belief system in which you are always self-righteous is a baffling narcissism that you don't want to feed, you know? We all have a tendency towards bad decision making, and you don't want to be enmeshed in a politics or a spiritual practice that is going to feed the worst aspects of whatever negative, self-defeating way of being in the world you might tread on.
Yeah.
You know? So don't feed your narcissism with social justice or fundamentalist Christianity or paganism.
Well,
or
what all that stuff has in common, you know, is that it's like that they are essentially like demanding an individual take on collective global issues. And to do that when your own house is not in order is always an issue. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't, I know somebody right now who on Instagram is having a full on meltdown and is like a Orthodox Christian, and their shit looks crazy as fuck. You know what I mean? And it's like, didn't take witchcraft to do that. The person's like part of a large church. And it's like, there's just something about like metaphysical beliefs that go off the rails first. And I think it's just because they're not like really tethered to reality, you know?
Yeah. I mean, if you get to talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu more than once, I'm going to keep talking about becoming a therapist.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know,
that's our show.
we're staring at this. One of my textbooks is Counseling the Culturally Diverse, which is sitting here. And, you know, the premise of it and contemporary approaches to being a psychotherapist is you meet your client where they are. And you try to understand their psyche according to their cultural location. So, you don't hold people who are of a different cultural background from you to your own standards. And that's an incredibly complicated thing. And I think it's full of holes, logistical holes. But one of the complicated things about it is what I was just saying. Like, actually that textbook is full of, well, if a person has this belief, that may sound bipolar, but actually if they're from this culture, that's actually this thing. It's actually culturally normal for this person to have these beliefs. And as a godless person who doesn't believe in anything, I find it all resembles mental illness from where I'm sitting, which is at the most narcissistic position anyone could ever take. And I recognize the irony. Spiritual beliefs, even when they're culturally upheld, even when they're normative, even when they have thousands of years of history, they can still be really bananas and not necessarily support good mental health.
I mean, the one thing that all religions have in common that I've observed is that they're really useful for controlling populations of people, especially dumb people.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And it's like...
Which has positive and negative aspects.
Totally. And then I was trying to think about like, okay, well, how does, like, I mean, that's kind of like a wide net to throw, right? And kind of a strong claim to make. And so the next thing I thought about was like, well, does like, we'll call it craft-inspired witchcraft, does that fit that model a little bit? And because it's so individual. Like I remember like one of the first witchcraft books I read was like The Solitary Practitioner by like Robert Cunningham. I think it was Robert Cunningham, but it was basically like, hey, you're a lonely witch and you don't have a coven. This is your practice. And it was actually just basically like advocating a very, I mean, now that I read more and stuff, it's very much Ram Dass with candles was pretty much like what the whole practice was. I find that like my political outlook is a little bit like that. It's very cobbled together. It doesn't really meet up with other people. And then because of that, it's weird. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll find myself like, someone will be like, oh, you have machine guns too? You must like this stuff. And you're like, no. Or it's like,
yeah, oh yeah.
Like, for example, I have a friend who's, like sending me a ton of Bud Light memes. Right. Because like,
awesome.
It seems like we're probably, that person may be on the same page on some other stuff. And like, well, actually, I don't care about this at all.
Yeah.
And I'm in marketing, so I kind of see how it went off the rails. And I don't think there's any like, I mean, there's kind of an agenda here because everybody wants to look like a hero or whatever. Sure. But it's not like, they're not trying to like psyop the world by having this like corny theater kid get like a special edition of a Bud Light thing. You know what I mean? And I think this person, like, at the same time, just because you don't get it or don't like that person's persona doesn't necessarily make you transphobic either. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, so...
See, I just send you memes according to not a specific political belief, but
is the joke
like
good?
You're cynical about everything.
Yeah, but
this
like,
is cynical. Chad might like it.
But to me, it's like, is the joke funny? Is kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm willing to like laugh. Like, I was like, loved all the anti-George Bush jokes during the, like that time period.
Because he was your guy?
No, I was so anti. Like, the one thing I really resent more than anything else is dumb people in charge. Like, or people who just sort of like familyed their way into the stuff.
Oh, it's the monarchy thing again.
Yeah, it's like a monarchy thing. It's like, it's why like, I think probably Hillary Clinton was probably the most prepared and ruthless person to be our president. And I think she probably would have been probably pretty awesome. But I just hate the idea of a family keeping on. You know what I mean? I just fucking hate it. Like, I don't like, I'm so glad that Biden's son's a crackhead so that we don't have to deal with like 8 years from now, another Biden president. Like, and it's not because of any particular politics. I just don't like dynasties. Like, I just fucking hate it.
Oh my God.
I don't like it in sports. Somebody's kid born on third base, fucking every advantage. Fuck that, man. I think everyone, it should be like pushing the wheel of pain like Conan. Whoever rises above that earns their place in society,
That's funny. Reminds me of the only thing that Malcolm Gladwell ever said that I like. He's a fucking sham. Oh God, I hate that guy. But The one thing he said that
I've had too much exposure to him.
he's a fake scientist. He's a fake scientist. And then when he's called on his bullshit, he doubles down and doesn't do what a good scientist does, which is like, oh, there's new data. My understanding of the world is according to new data. He's just out to publish books. He's exactly what we were talking about earlier.
But yeah.
Oh no. Well, I mean, I love airport lit philosophy, but no, I'm saying more like he's a scam artist. Like he had a couple of good, clever ideas, but he's no fucking scientist. Anyway, pardon my rants. The one thing he said that I kind of dug was his idea about the underdog, which is people always root for the underdog. And he said, I don't, because when the underdog wins, it means the universe makes no sense. I'm always rooting for the better team because when the better team wins, it means that the better team won.
This dude has clearly never seen the Bad News Bears, and he can go fuck himself. I just
appreciate that look. That I don't agree. I just appreciate that perspective. No, the universe should make sense. Better people should win. Why are we rooting for the thing that's probably not as good? It's a fun story.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just being difficult, but like I would say often though, quote unquote better is more funded. You know,
that is often true.
And like when it's generationally funded, that it just, I don't know why, it just bothers me. Like I was trying to think about it like logically, is there like a logical reason, you know, and then I'm very inconsistent on it. So like somebody who has my feelings about that should be like I don't think there should be inheritance taxes. You know what I mean? Like, so like that's completely opposite. I feel like if I die with $10 million, I should be able to give it right to my family, but now they're going to be rich assholes. So
yeah,
I don't know. I guess, I mean, nothing makes sense. That's why you need shit like witchcraft. You just got to make some sense of this world.
Yeah. Although this movie wasn't about making sense. It was just about learning a lesson and come up and...
It's about a vibe, as they say now.
It is mostly a vibe, yeah. A vibe with a bad soundtrack.
Yeah. Do you think the sound... Bad? I mean, I know what you're saying by bad soundtrack.
Mediocre, which is worse than bad.
It sounds appropriate for the film. Like, I think is like, it doesn't like stick out too much. Like I was rewatching Underworld the other day. The music in that film stands out as kind of bad to me.
Invasive.
Yeah, it's invasive. Whereas this like Letters to Cleo could be on the background in this girl's room.
It is realistic. That's true. It doesn't do the thing that irritates me, which is when the music in a scene is not the music that would be in that room.
Right. You know,
it's cooler than the people in the
it's
scene.
also like the music on that soundtrack is not listened to now outside of it. So it really is almost like if a movie about 30s had like the Charleston in it, you know, like, or something like that. It's like none of this music made it. I mean, the Smiths, the original song is still very big.
Well, of course.
I mean, and goddamn, San Francisco has had like a fucking goth, it may as well be goth month in San Francisco right now, you know, with Sisters of Mercy playing. I think KMFDM played. That
Zymox was not that long ago.
Yeah, Zymox. Who else? Somebody else was
The Cure is in 2 weeks.
Yeah, The Cure is 2 weeks. That festival. That
Cruel World is in Southern California. Right now, actually, a friend texted me, like, South Moon is about to go on. I'm like, fuck, I wish I was there. Well, I don't wish I was there, but I wish I was there.
Yeah, Crystal was going to go there this week, but she opted out. Yeah. There's not, you could pick... The Clash, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Tom Waits, and Bruce Springsteen could all be on stage at a festival, and I would say, fuck that festival. Like, I have no desire to go to any festival ever.
Well, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to check with Monique if it's okay to say this. I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but Monique performed at Coachella one year.
Oh, interesting.
And basically, she and we got access to like a trailer, free food, free water, huge backstage area, and basically a golf cart with a driver.
Well, that's how you do it, man.
Who would take us the back route to any stage that we wanted to go to, and also some other perks that I'm not going to talk about on a podcast. But
free cocaine.
Close. But it was great. It was super fun.
Mm-hmm.
But after that experience, I was just like, I'm never standing in line for a $10 bottle of water again in my life ever.
A little bit of VIP will ruin you for life,
that's
man.
That's the thing. No, that is 100% what happened.
When Crystal worked for Red Bull, like we got to go VIP for all kinds of rad shit. And like one of the things that we got to do was go to MotoGP when it first came here and to America, which is motorcycle. It's like the F1 for motorcycle racing. It's like the highest tier of motorcycle racing. So the first year they have it in America, it's like a big fucking deal. Like people from all over the world come, and we're sitting in this little area with Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise. You know, everything's free, air conditioned, right by the pits. You can feel the engines. And then, you know, my friends a couple of years later would be like, "You want to go out in the stands?" Fuck that with the rest of you proles. No way.
Well, this I will say without Monique's permission, but it's funny, especially around her reign of Miss Tranny Shack when she was performing like relentlessly in the clubs. You know, Monique wouldn't stand in line anywhere ever. She would be ushered in the front door anywhere she ever wanted to go. That, of course, depends on where she wants to go.
Right.
But it was so funny too, the few times like we would go to something that I wanted to go to where I don't get to walk in the front door and we'd have to wait in line. And it was like, she was so clearly uncomfortable standing in line. Like you could tell that primally she felt like something unjust was happening.
God, her and Crystal are like the same way. Because of Red Bull, like Crystal had like VIP status. Her job was to basically give money to every bar in the city. So we got to skip every line ever, right?
Totally.
And like, I can't remember what we were, something similar, you know, we had to be in a line. And I remember we're like, not even that long of a line. And Crystal's like, fuck this, I'm leaving. Like, I was like, whoa.
At the same time, like, again, I get it.
Yeah.
Like,
I would argue, you know, obviously it sounds very spoiled or whatever, but I would say that, like, you know, that's like a benefit to certain choices you made with your career. You know what I mean? It's like,
fully is.
It's like, yeah, Monique got to skip every line and be the cool lady around town, but like, it wasn't like there was a 401k for that, you know?
True.
So, I mean, I think about that. Like sometimes one of the few things I romanticize about bartending was that like, there's a little bit of an underground for bartenders around, especially in San Francisco, especially in the early 2000s. You know, like you would not have to wait in line at Sparky's after work. You know what I mean? Like just all that sort of thing. And it is really fun to be part. It's one of the reasons why I totally understand crime. You know, like there's just an appeal to being part of a shadow world. You know, where you're like, you know, like in like the fictionalized Goodfellas sort of idea. You know, like that whole single long shot of going through the kitchen to get the table at the stage is better than simply having gone to get the table at the stage. Because you know, it's like
I was kind of thinking of the flashback in The Godfather, where just the grocer just gives him fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just stuff like that. Or like, I mean, like, yeah, like there's just something appealing about the black market and the underworld. Just naturally appealing. And I think that's like that same sort of that appeal is what's appealing about witchcraft. You're not supposed to be involved in witchcraft, you know.
But it gives you power.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I don't like about it too, is that sort of like the Montessori nerfing of witchcraft. You know, like you're not going to see at least to my knowledge, anybody Instagram being like, this is how to kill your enemies with a spell. Like it's all essentially like self-help adjacent.
Which is cute.
Yeah, it's fun. Again, like if it tickles your pickle, go for it, you know? Until it interferes with the tickling of my pickle.
If it gets you to dress goth, even better.
100% into it. Yeah, that's definitely a pro.
Should we leave it on that?
Yeah, whatever. Dress goth, get candles, read tarot cards, smoke dope.
Thanks for listening.
Woo.
Blessed be.
Oh, Jesus.
I sound half asleep. Can we back up about 30 seconds?
Yeah, let's back up 30 seconds.